Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how training splits can influence muscle growth and how to select the ideal training split specifically for you. The first thing we need to establish is what exactly we mean when referring to training splits for hypertrophy training. Training splits essentially refer to what muscle groups are trained on which days and how this is arranged throughout the week. So different training days will generally train different muscle groups. To understand how the training split may influence muscle growth, we need to have a look at a few important training variables. The most important consideration when choosing a training split is total weekly volume. This refers to how many sets are performed by each muscle group over the entire course of the week. Volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy, so this is the first and most important variable that should be considered. Trainees should experiment with different volumes over time to find what volume they can recover from and grow maximally. So the training split we implement is simply a product of volume and how it is distributed and arranged throughout the week. The next variable to consider is training frequency. Frequency refers to how many times per week a muscle group is trained. It should be understood that when discussing frequency, we are assuming that volume is equated. So a higher frequency means less volume per session, while a lower frequency means more volume per session. Frequency doesn't seem to influence muscle growth to any drastic extent, assuming volume is equated. However, it does seem that training a muscle 2 or more times per week does seem to be slightly superior to training it only once per week. So if possible, it is generally advisable to train a muscle group more than once per week, although total weekly volume is still a much more important consideration. Another factor to consider regarding training splits is the effects of acute fatigue. This refers to short-term fatigue which impacts performance during the session. What this means is that each exercise that is trained in a single session produces fatigue and negatively impacts performance of the following exercises, especially if multiple exercises train the same muscle group. While longer rest periods can minimize acute fatigue, there is inevitably a slight decline in performance towards the end of a long training session compared to the start. This is relevant for hypertrophy training splits because it means that the more exercises we perform in a single session, the greater the acute fatigue will be. This will mean training quality is lower, which limits mechanical tension and probably results in a slightly less hypertrophic stimulus. Whereas if less volume is performed per session, then acute fatigue will be lower and training quality will be higher. Another factor which may influence our training split is its practicality. Some trainees may only be able to realistically train 3 to 4 times per week due to other commitments, while some can train every day. This will influence how many times a trainee can go to the gym and therefore how many times each muscle group will be trained. Furthermore, trainees may perform other exercises throughout the week which could influence their training split too. For example, if a trainee plays a competitive field sport every week on Saturday, then they may avoid training the legs on Friday to minimize fatigue. Therefore, the trainee should adapt their training split practically around their lifestyle rather than training on an unrealistic schedule. Let's now create some example training splits that can all be effective for the goal of muscle growth. Before we can create each training split, we first need to establish some fundamental training variables that will be consistent for each split. The first variable to prescribe is volume. Let's say for this trainee, the following volumes will be allocated to each muscle group: 16 sets for the chest and back, 6 direct sets for the shoulders, 12 sets for the quads, 10 sets for the hamstrings, 10 sets of isolated biceps, 8 sets of isolated triceps, and 8 sets of isolated calf training. These are just example volumes to use for this video, but each trainee will need to experiment with what volume they can tolerate. But for this video, these volumes will stay consistent for each training split that we create. And the next training variable that we will prescribe is exercise selection. For this trainee, we will implement the following exercises for each muscle group. For the chest, we will use the incline bench press, flat dumbbell press, and cable flies. For the back, we will use the lat pull down and chest supported row. For the shoulders, we will implement the dumbbell overhead press and lateral raise. For the quads, we will select the hack squat and leg extension machine. For the hamstrings, we will select the stiff leg deadlift and leg curl. For the biceps, we will implement the dumbbell curl. For the triceps, the cable pushdown. And for the calves, we have selected standing calf raises. Once again, these exercises will stay consistent for each training split that we create. The first example training split is a push-pull leg split training 6 days per week. This means training the chest, shoulders, and triceps on one day, the back and biceps on the second day, the legs on the third day, and this repeats 2 times throughout the week. For this example trainee, a push-pull leg split may look something like this. As we can see here, the volume for each muscle group has been distributed across the relevant days, so each muscle group gets trained twice per week. We can also see here the order of the exercises change across the 2 days each muscle is trained, to shift the emphasis of what muscles or muscle regions are prioritized. Next, we have an upper-lower split 6 days per week. This means the entire upper body will be trained 3 times per week, and the lower body will also be trained 3 times. Therefore, there will be more exercises per session for this program, although the volume will be lower for each exercise. However, we can still see here that the total weekly volume and the exercises for each muscle group are the same too. Next, we have an upper-lower split again, although this time the trainee will only train 4 times per week as opposed to 6. Here, each muscle group is trained twice per week, which means the volume per session will be higher because the frequency is lower. These sessions may take a long time to get through and may be difficult to perform with high quality. Furthermore, the isolation exercises at the end of the session are probably going to suffer slightly because acute fatigue will be higher. In this split, we have the same upper-lower program 4 days per week, although an extra day of shoulders and arm training has been added. Each upper body session doesn't include direct shoulder training because this has been redistributed to day 5. However, the shoulders still get trained indirectly through pressing and rowing exercises, so each muscle is still trained twice per week, except the shoulders and arms are trained 3 times per week. So the shoulders and arms still get trained on each upper body session, although an extra training day allows the volume to be distributed over 3 sessions rather than 2. This will allow the shoulders and arms to be trained in a less fatigued state, making each set of higher quality. In this split, we have a full body program again, but this uses a 4-day per week frequency. So each muscle group is trained 4 times per week, but the exercises on each day are slightly different. The order of exercise is also different to slightly shift the emphasis of each muscle group in different sessions. Because per session volume is quite high, these training sessions may be long and may be impractical for some trainees. And the last example training split we will create is a classic bro split. Here, only one primary muscle group is trained each day over 5 training days per week. So day 1 trains the chest, day 2 trains the back, day 3 trains the legs, day 4 trains the shoulders, and day 5 trains the arms. So each muscle group is only trained once per week, meaning that all the weekly volume for each muscle group will be performed on that particular day. This program still uses the same total volume, although because frequency is low, each exercise requires many sets to meet the same weekly volume. This is a difficult way to accumulate high volumes, and the quality of training will probably be quite low towards the end of the session, because the same muscle groups are trained with all their volume in each session. Also, we can see here that some of the days look very challenging and timely, while other days look very easy. Therefore, this is probably going to be a very impractical training split compared with our previous examples. So what can we practically take away from all this information and these example training splits? Well, the take-home message here is that there is no single best training split. There are many different ways to create a weekly training split that can all be effective for muscle growth. As long as total weekly volume is equated, the main consideration when creating a training split is its practicality. So trainees should create a training split that they enjoy doing and something that fits into their weekly schedule. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.